Hello, my name is Alice Chen. I'm a principal with DKS Associates. I lead the planning practice, and I'm also the Vice President of Operations for California Planning Roundtable. And I'm excited to be here for the interview with Elaine Costello. And I'm going to let Elaine introduce herself because I'm sure I will not get everything correct.
Okay. I'm Elaine Costello. I am a consultant right now with the firm of Baker Tilly, and I am a longtime planner. Here to talk about sort of what my history has been in planning.
Great, thanks. So, just to kind of start and get a sense of your career path, why did you choose planning as a profession? And maybe also just share a little bit about when you decided that you actually wanted to pursue a planning career.
Okay. So I think actually the way I grew up had a lot of influence on why I became a planner. I was born in Boston. You don't pick up the Boston accent anymore because I've lived in California for a long time. But I was born in Boston in a very ethnic Irish and Italian neighborhood, very close knit. Kind of, if it takes a village to raise a child, that was the kind of neighborhood it was. Everybody went to the same parish school. And so it was this kind of, it had its downsides, but it had, as a little child, it had a lot of upside. There was the school, you had a lot of support, an extended family, a kind of sense that you could go and come all around the neighborhood safely. And that had a lot of interest because I now realize, having lived in California all this time, that's an unusual way to grow up. But also being in Boston, I had opportunities to go beyond that neighborhood because there's an excellent transit system in Boston, the MTA. And I was a really curious kind of kid, and I guess I liked to do field work. So I would take the MTA around Boston with my brothers. One of them had tutoring downtown, and I would take them downtown on the train when I was pretty young. And we would go take the swan boats in Boston Common and rock around Beacon Hill and go over to the Charles River. And also it allowed me, I always liked school, and I was a good student. And there was a public school in Boston called the Latin School, which is a real classic. It's just what it sounds like, 6 years of Latin. You start in 7th to 12th grade. But with the transit system, what it was, I was able to get across the city. My mom didn't have to drive me. There was no way. I came from a big family. She was not going to drive me to school.
Yeah.
And I got to meet kids from all over the city, from very different backgrounds. So I got a sense of how communities and how they're designed and what kind of services they offer, what kinds of opportunities they can create for people who live there, especially children. So from Latin school, Latin school was a good school, so you could get into good colleges, and I went on to Vassar. And at Vassar, in my freshman year, I read a book called The Lonely Crowd by David Reisman. And most is very interesting to me, all these alienated people having grown up in this close-knit, urban community. But it talked about how specialized professions had become and how that kind of kept people entrenched in the status quo. And that there was one profession that he mentioned, which was urban planning, where he said people thought holistically, and that allowed them to create innovative solutions for different ways and better ways to live in cities. I underlined it as a freshman in college and thought, oh, I'll think about that, and kept the book. I still have it. I actually have a copy of the quote with me today. Anyway, I went on. I thought about medicine. I thought about all kinds of things. And I went on to the architecture school at Columbia and studied urban planning. And that's how I got into the field. It was kind of, both kind of how living in a community with a lot of opportunities changed my life and how that inspired me to want to do it for other people.
That's great. No, and just kind of hearing that it was an early start compared to, I think some people come into the profession later, but it seems like you had that experience as a freshman, your first year of college.
Right.
That's great. Yeah. Just the sense of so what are some of the values or factors that influenced your choice of jobs? I mean, you didn't get into it in your intro, but maybe you can also kind of describe some of the jobs that you've had in the.
Okay. So here I had this great launch, and then I got my first job, and I think one of the things in planning, a lot of people's first jobs are not great. and sometimes later jobs are not great. So some things came up in my family. I had to move back to Boston with my then boyfriend, now long-term husband. And I got a job there that was just an old school, deadly planning job. Write reports that sit on the shelves, just come in. It was like study hall every day. It just did not work for me. I had not gone into this work to do that. So I did what I learned is really important for people. If you're not challenged and engaged in your work, leave the job. So I learned from that what I really wanted to have in the future were more challenging jobs, working on things that really mattered and were going to have an impact on people's lives. And even if it was controversial, I preferred that. So I learned a really valuable lesson. So my husband had always wanted to live in California, not always, but since I met him at Columbia, wanted to live in California near his brother and his brother's 5 kids. So we by way of Guatemala for a few months, moved to California. And there I got a job with Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, which is a large architectural firm working on a new town in Iran. And I realized that value of wanting more, it was very challenging, very demanding, but it was what I wanted. And it was going to make a big difference in the people who would get to live in that new town. So those are some of the values that have driven my work and my choice of jobs.
That's great. And maybe you touched upon it a little bit, but maybe just also, and you didn't really touch upon it in the intro, but just the types of jobs that you've had. I think that's fascinating. I just want to sidetrack a little bit just to kind of get understanding the types of jobs, because you've done kind of both private and public sector.
I have. I've moved between the private and the public sector. So I started off at SOM, and then I started to have a family. I had a little sole practitioner practice. I was the only one. I love this story. I got hired by San Mateo County to do their local coastal plan because there was one, but most of the existing staff there didn't want to work on it because it was controversial. They were caught in the old school of just do the report and do the study hall kind of approach to planning. And so that was my first entree into doing public sector work. And, we managed, it was timing. Timing is so essential in planning. Now we would never be able to protect, it's 110 square miles between San Francisco and Santa Cruz that are in that plan and are protected for agriculture. Now they're used for organic agriculture and for recreation. And it wouldn't happen. Now there'd be too much pressure. The land would be too valuable. But it gave me an entree into the public sector. I then was offered by a very progressive young city manager who was willing to take a risk. I was offered the job as planning director in Belmont. I didn't really have the traditional background for that kind of job. I was quite young. But he was looking for someone who liked a challenge, and I certainly do. So there, I worked on the plan for the San Juan Hills, which was referred to as the planner's burial ground. When I first arrived on a project, nothing like getting introduced by, oh, you're going to try and work on that project? We call it the planner's burial ground. Oh, thank you. But what it was, people had tried to work on something. It's a hillside area with geological hazards, but it had been subdivided into these antiquated subdivisions back in the day when you could buy a lot at a movie theater for $20 or something as a prize, as a door prize. So anyway, but it wasn't suitable for development. So, I had the support of a creative team. We found people who knew about antiquated subdivisions, which is another thing I really learned was we don't know a lot. There's a lot we don't know as planners, but the skill to find out who does know and who can help us is essential. So we put together transfer development rights. We got the Trust for Public Lands to buy a large part of it, and we got the plan approved, and that was a big success for me personally, and I learned a lot from it. But there wasn't a lot more to do, so I moved early in my career. I moved quite a bit in between jobs, not every year, but every couple of years, which I liked because I got a broader exposure.
Yeah. So
I moved to South San Francisco, which is a more industrial town. I liked it a lot. And there, I worked on the extension of the BART extension to the airport. And the city very much wanted it undergrounded, and BART very much didn't want to set the precedent of undergrounding new lines. But again, we sort of put together a team. We put together a redevelopment agency. We convinced BART we worked with BART to say we're going to upzone the land to have more housing, and we'll be able to use the funds from the redevelopment agency to help you offset the cost of undergrounding. And we did. It was undergrounded, and that community, it was going to go near a major park and through neighborhoods, and instead it's underground. So that was my second job. So then I went to a third job as community development director, and I stayed in that one longer, which was in Mountain View. That was in the 90s, and at that time, what I liked about Mountain View, what I was looking for was really like a challenging project that I could take on. A community that had a sense that it wanted to get better and was willing to be innovative to do that. So Mountain View was in a slump at that point. The large-scale manufacturing was moving out. They had shopping centers that had failed. It was a tough time for the city, but opportunities arise. And one of the first transit-oriented new urbanist developments, the Crossings in Mountain View, was proposed for one of these old shopping centers. And the city was like, yeah, this is going to be better than a vacant shopping center. So we had like over 100 exceptions to the city codes to build that. And what it was a model of doing higher density housing at low rise, so that with porches, so that it had the feel of a traditional neighborhood, but was not traditional. It was small lot, single family, townhouses, low density, higher density apartment buildings, but it had the feeling of a traditional neighborhood. And very successful, won awards. So we did a lot of innovative housing like that, which was really satisfying when I was there. We actually won a national APA award for our housing innovations. So I was there for 15 years, and there comes a time when I think I'd like to go back to private practice, take what I've learned, become a consultant again. And I've worked sort of as an adjunct to a couple of different consulting firms. I work sort of as an adjunct to Baker Tilly right now. And it's been great because I've been able to take that experience from those years in the public sector and help people figure out how to become more effective in their communities. In one case I really like, in San Bruno, the YouTube was proposing a campus. San Bruno staff had no idea how to handle this, a specific plan for a new master plan for a YouTube campus. They were clueless. Well, in Mountain View, I had a lot of experience over those years I was there with doing high-tech campuses, so I was able to help them get a specific plan and get community benefits from that specific plan. So that was enormously satisfying. So that's what I've been doing.
That's great. It's kind of great to hear the trajectory and that it wasn't a kind of a straight pathway.
No, not at all.
It seems like you've done some leaps and bounds and really took on a lot of different challenging jobs and projects.
But I think one of the themes is like to kind of make sure that the work is engaging and challenging and not shy away from controversy.
So you kind of did cover it, but what are your most memorable projects where you're really proud of making a difference? And you touched upon a couple, maybe, I don't know if there's other examples or if one of those you want to highlight.
I really hit on some of the highlights. Certainly the coastal plan is one that I continue to enjoy, going out there and thinking, not just me, the whole team that came together to put that plan in place. The political, the community, the technical, I was just kind of helping them get it done. And, and then, the help that I've done in Belmont, addressing a difficult issue in South San Francisco, the housing work in Mountain View, and then the work in consulting have all been really rewarding.
That's great. So kind of pivoting off of just some of these kind of personal reflections, can you share a difficulty that you faced during your career that really tested your personal and your professional values?
Well, when I entered the profession, there were really very few women in leadership positions in planning. For example, I have never worked for a woman boss.
Wow.
So even though there are now a lot of women in planning, and including in leadership positions, that was not the case. So, for example, in the 3 cities where I was community development director, I was the first woman community development director. In some of them, I was the first woman department head. So I would go into staff meetings and lots of meetings where I'd be the only woman. And, I would hear the crude jokes that you wouldn't expect, from what you knew of these men, you wouldn't expect them to be making those jokes, but it was almost as though there was a kind of locker room culture that they sort of lived in a kind of shocking way. And that was a challenge to sort of learn how to deal with that kind of atmosphere. But I did. And I learned to speak out and sort of say, excuse me, well, just excuse me, I found was often enough to have them wake up and go, wait a minute, And so that was really challenging. But not only was I the only woman, I was also having babies. So being pregnant and nursing and all that involves as a planning director, a community development director, was really unusual and very challenging. So I had to kind of find my own path because there weren't older mentors where you'd go, well, wait a minute, I could talk to Mary. She had 3 kids and raised them, and they weren't there. So I kind of had to craft it, and I learned to really talk to the people that I was working with that, yes, I would need some flexibility, but that flexibility would not interfere with my work. So it meant that I had to really maintain a high standard for my work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I found that the more valuable you were in terms of your work product, the easier it was to get the flexibility that you needed as a parent. So that was really challenging. One of the things, it was always worth it. I always felt like, and part of the time, at the time, I didn't think of myself as a pioneer kind of. I just thought, well, this is what I have to do. But now I look back and think, well, that was pretty challenging. But I made a couple of good decisions. I married a man who was really carried at least half the load and really chipped in. And if one of the kids was sick, we'd take our calendars and open them up and say, what have you got today? And what have I got today? And can we split the day? And he'd do the night meetings and take them to McDonald's. And so we had that. That was really very, very valuable. And then I also found a network of other women who were planning directors who also had families. They were my peers. They weren't mentors, but they were colleagues, and that was a great support group. But it wasn't easy.
Yeah. So any particular lessons learned that you want to share or particular outcomes from that?
One of the lessons I learned was that it's worth it, that it's worth making the effort, but that it will be an effort, and that you can get flexibility. I found it was better to just be open about the need for that and make sure that it worked what I needed worked in the workplace. And then I needed them to be flexible. I knew that the best way to do that was to be a high performer, but also be flexible for them. To not just expect that because I was a woman that I was entitled to this. I think we should be, actually, but it wasn't the world. But I found that it worked. People would do it. And also to know that there would be some people who would criticize, and just know it was worth it to be able to balance family and career.
And at that time, you were public sector?
I was in the public sector at that time, right.
Right. So kind of again, with some of these personal reflections, what are you most passionate about that defines who you are? and shapes how you approach planning and life in general, I guess. I mean, we're hearing a little bits of that, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think I just really love learning, and planning is a wonderful profession for people who love to learn. Because the thing that's always amazed me, it's about I can't think of another profession where they'll say, oh, well, you can do a housing element because you're a planner, even though I had no background in housing. But I could learn quickly. And so I've never had a boring moment in planning over all these years. And I've always felt engaged and like I'm learning a lot. And I'm really proud that we get to help communities build a future that's going to be improve their quality of life. One of my staff used to have a joke, which I've stayed with too. We build our mistakes. So I had to take it really seriously, but we also build our successes. So we see concrete. That was one of the advantages of being a director versus a consultant. I was there long enough to see the concrete results of my work. And to see people who, like in Mountain View, I was lucky to be there at a time when people felt this community is just getting better and better. And yeah, so those have been the kinds of things that have inspired me.
That's great. So just now thinking about the planning profession, what has the profession done extremely well? And what has resulted in, let's put it as unintended consequences?
Yeah. Well, there are more opportunities for women in planning. Actually, as I look back, I think there were more opportunities for women in the public sector at the time that I came in than in the private sector, in leadership positions. We've certainly become a lot more strategic. I do consulting with all kinds of planning departments. I don't see, there are very few places where people are writing reports that are just going to sit on shelves. We've done a terrific job on public engagement. And really, we are the group really ensuring that the voices of all the stakeholders in a community are heard, including people who've had very little access in the past. I think planning should be really proud of what we have done to really not just get input from the haves, but to get input from the people who have been marginalized in our society. And you and I do that leadership work together, which we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But I am so impressed by the commitment that young planners have to social equity and social justice. So that I think is terrific. What we have not done as well, I think the big issue for me is housing. We just did not do a good job of anticipating the needs of our changing population and the consequences of not building housing when we should be, so that we now, and the cost of housing, of not really addressing those issues, so that we have so many unhoused people now. And we have so many people who are underhoused. And I just think that our profession just was, we were working on growth control. And when I think back of it, we should be working on where should we be building more housing? And I think that's an area that if I could go back and rewind my career, I'd pay more attention to that.
So in terms of like the next generation, you kind of alluded to them, you're really impressed. And as you've said, we've done the Leadership Academy together where we've actually had the opportunity to work with a lot of the next generation. This can be a tough profession. And there are times it seems like, you've been able to meet all the challenges that you've had to face. But what are some survival skills that you can offer to this next generation?
Well, one survival skill is to develop your skills. David Boer, who was the founder of the California Planning Roundtable, which we'll talk about in a minute, one time I was doing a training with him, and I was like, oh, man, this is so hard. How can people find a path through this? And he said, what do you mean hard? This is when you get to use your skills. And I've tried to really hold on to that phrase as to be prepared for the challenges So throughout my career, I've been lucky. I've been in organizations that have supported training, but I have really worked on getting myself trained on things like leadership and communication and negotiation and all of those different soft skills, strategic thinking, and also the other thing that I would say, so I think it's important to develop your skills, and you can do it by, I would say to you, if your organization has training, do that. APA offers training at their conferences, and sometimes I know online as well. You and I have done a bunch of training together on leadership and strategic thinking. I did for over 20 years. I've always done at least 1 or 2 sessions on training on some kind of skill, mostly leadership. And that's available to people so that when they face the challenges, they engage in them and they think, okay, now it's time to use my skills. The other thing I would say is keep finding the ways to be inspired and re-energized. And that for me has been through mostly membership with you and others on the California Planning Roundtable. I've been a member of the Roundtable for over 20 years, and it's a group of about 34 planners, North and South, California, public and private sector. And we get together several times a year in different parts of the state, and our goal is to really keep developing the skills of planners and keep people aware of best practices, keep ourselves aware of best practices. I found there was the secondary effect of keeping me energized and keeping me inspired. I just remember some meetings in Long Beach and hearing about what they were doing with public engagement. And being in Los Angeles and seeing what they were doing with housing, just so inspiring. And that allowed me to go back to my day-to-day work refreshed and with the energy. And I think that's what worked for me. And I think it's just kind of some ideas for younger people to how to keep themselves from, because it is hard work and you do get criticized. It's not a love fest. It's rewarding but challenging. And that would be my thoughts on some ideas for folks.
Great. So I don't know, any kind of last kind of comments you want to share, or do you want to?
Well, I think, I guess I always come back to the idea that this work is really, we're very privileged to be able to do this work. It just feels amazing to me to be able to help communities make decisions about their future, to give them ideas of the alternatives that they have, to raise, you could do this, we could try this. It's been incredible. It's so much fun. It's not always fun. No, there are dreary times, and there are times when you can get really, the criticism and the sort of and just the long night meetings. There's a lot, but overall, when I think about our work, and I'm still working, I think about how lucky to be so engaged and to feel involved in something that's has so much impact on communities. So that would be my closing comments.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Elaine.
Well, thank you for doing this.
It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.